Hello, this is Manny Motiki, and I'm coming at you with another episode of Quarantiki, where I talk about all things related to the art and music and sometimes bars and artists of the tiki subculture. I often talk about my mugs because I have a lot of mugs. So today I'm going to talk about this guy. Which is technically called the modern Shortneck Dawn. He's an interesting mug, mass-produced mug. I do believe that Tiki Farm made these. He's a unique one in the fact that he's got the big brim. You don't see that very often. Usually, more or less, a lot of mugs are more or less staying to the cylindrical shapes. This one's, really a bust. And the character is, Don Beach. And I got this from Don the Beachcombers back when they were in operation from Huntington Beach. So this is a fun mug. He's neat. If you look at mine carefully, you'll notice there is a lot of battle damage. He's got cracks everywhere. He's got chips everywhere. Something happened to this guy. And it's a little bit more than he was just dropped. So the short story is he was one of my first that I got, like in the top, first 6. And then my partner got a PhD run out of state. I was super proud of her. And we moved out of state. Technically, she moved ahead of me, and then a couple months later, I threw everything in the back of our car with a trailer and moved all the rest out there in like 2 days. Traveled across the country. Made it there for Christmas. That was important. And, as I have alluded to, sometimes types change. They go in directions that you don't want them to. And unfortunately, that happened with our relationship. So I did want the mugs back, so I got the mugs back, but they came back to me in let's say a state of disrepair. I'll never know where that happened, but they came back to me in a pretty rough state. But luckily, I'm very good at gluing things back together. So that's what I've done, and that's why he's got all the battle damage. I may do something different. I may do some gold inlay on the areas where there's cracks. I may take a 3D scan and reprint the form and recast it. There's some things that I've thought about doing, but right now he's kind of good the way he is. He sits up on one of my top shelves, just kind of looking down on everybody, and that's kind of appropriate. So that gives us a great segue into who is this Don Beach guy. Some people have asked me to go a little bit more into the history of the Tiki thing. Tiki subculture, which I'm happy to do for at least what I know. So I was asked also, is Don Beach the mascot of the bar? Well, I guess that was kind of true. It's more accurate to say that he is kind of the grandfather and founder of the entire modern Tiki subculture movement that's very popular again in the United States. So he, Don Beach was his chosen name. His original name was Ernest Raymond Beaumont Gant, I believe. It's a very long name, and that could be part of why he changed it. Very much a theatrical guy. But in the 1930s, he was a Prohibition-era rum runner. In that he got to see a lot of the Caribbean, he got to see a lot of areas, and also, just kind of had a very interesting life story. When Prohibition changed and became legalized, the rules were that you could have a bar, but you had to be a restaurant as well. And he had a great idea. He said, hey, I can combine the rums that I've seen, the different elements that I've been exposed to. I can combine food from China, the Orient, and just make this a real exotic thing, almost through a Hollywood lens. And that's really important. There's a lot of sensitivity that I think is worth having conversations about appropriation, and especially with the tiki culture, because there are a lot of elements that do legitimately are inspired by areas and cultures that are not native American cultures. On the same note, I don't believe that this was ever intended to be a legitimate representation of any one culture. I think it was more of a tropical fantasy that you would see in the Hollywood movies. And that was kind of the intent. That was why they were, very often his restaurants had waterfalls and jungle all over the place. They were intended to be kind of a theme Hollywood-esque experience on something that most people were never going to be able to have the means to see. You couldn't just hop on an airplane and travel, to the Pacific very easily, back in the 30s. This was a way of kind of bringing this movie-esque fantasy to the masses. And, and this started in Hollywood, and that was also part of it. And he created something, again, like his cocktails. He would mix elements together that normally weren't associated together. Prior to him doing what he did, throwing rum in a cocktail with a fancy glass and, in a tropical setting that hadn't been done. At least not on the scale that he was doing it. So he did create something new there. And that became really, really popular. It became popular with, blue-collar guys. It became popular with, high-end Hollywood people, influencers of the time, Howard Hughes, Charlie Chaplin. They were known regulars to this guy's bar and restaurant. And it's very interesting because it didn't stop there. There were other elements. There were, Hollywood elements. There were, there were reasons why this was the start of a cultural kind of trend that did affect fashion. It affected architecture. It really swept the culture. The people, coming out of Prohibition were excited about something exotic and a little bit forbidden. And that was definitely what he kind of capitalized on. Then you had World War II, and a lot of people got deployed out into the Pacific region. And when they came back, they weren't the type of people that could afford to travel. They didn't have the means to do that. So that was the other thing that Don was, trying to do, was he was, wanting to make it accessible, wanting to, have these guys be able to take their families to a restaurant and relive at least a little bit of the positive experiences that they may have seen or experienced. And again, that was very much a thing. Don alone ended up with something like 35 restaurants that had his name distributed throughout the United States. There were others that borrowed from what he was doing, Trader Vic's, etc., and they also kind of, added to that craze. And that craze kind of stood up until the 60s, and it kind of went down from there. I had a resurgence in the 90s, if you remember Miami Vice and things like that. There were definitely some elements there. Went back down, and now in the, the 20s, I guess we're back in the 20s now, so in the teens and 20s, we, had that resurgence again, and it's still going strong. And I think a lot of it comes back to the original escapism, wanting to just kind of throw your feet back and just kind of pretend the rest of the world isn't out there and live in this fun little fantasy setting that's very theatrical and very kitschy and somewhat silly. And I think that's part of the reason why you're having the popularity of it now. But yeah, when you come back down to it, Don Beach was the guy that started it all. First restaurant, he was the first one to really start doing what became known as the tiki drinks. He guarded his recipes very, very carefully for quite a long time. He just started the ball rolling, and here we are 90 years later, still talking about it. So there's a little bit of history, it's a little bit of information about this, this modern Shortneck Dawn bust. And there you go. So thank you for joining. If you like what I'm doing, please like, follow, and share. That's important. And I'll catch you next time. Aloha.